Recently, I had the opportunity to participate in a webinar that discussed the challenges and opportunities that exist in the up-and-coming geologic hydrogen arena. In this webinar, the person who is my guest in today's podcast discussed from a strategic planning perspective key aspects that are required for linking investment and exploration in geologic hydrogen. His presentation covered important aspects such as significant factors that can affect the decision making for embarking on geologic hydrogen exploration to potential risks as well as potential rewards. He also provided very valuable insights regarding the topic. So, in case you missed the webinar and I am referring to, or simply if you are interested in learning about investment and exploration in geologic hydrogen, this podcast episode is for you. And for that, I'm very pleased to have Aaron Mattson, CEO and founder of Mafic Consulting. Aaron has a wealth of experience in business strategy, planning, and modeling, and in recent months his focus gravitates around geologic hydrogen. And with this purpose, he founded Mafic Consulting, and I will leave him to explain us about his company's mission and vision in a moment. Now, without further introduction, Aaron, welcome to this podcast episode.
Thank you for having me, Jose. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Great. Yeah, I have some interesting questions and I'm sure the audience will be happy to hear what you have to say. So my first question, Aaron, could you please provide some details about your background and why you're interested in geologic hydrogen?
Yes, so originally, like a lot of people in geological hydrogen, I started off in oil and gas, and I worked in that for the last 12 years. As of the last 2 years, I was working on the electrical energy side of things, but I first came to my attention in 2022 when I spent 2 years researching other hydrogen forms, looking at how do traditional oil and gas service companies transition into renewables. Hydrogen was one of those areas, green and blue, that had the most similarities for companies to start to look to adapt their IP and their capabilities and to move into the renewable space and diversify. White hydrogen back then, or natural hydrogen, was kind of a blip on the radar that really most people weren't following. It caught my attention in 2022, and I've been quietly following it ever since, like a lot of people, reading the academic research that is coming out. With Coloma also emerging out of Denver, it's kind of at that point started to take up more of my time, and I started looking at it from the standpoint, which is my background, what sort of strategy is going to be necessary for this to take off? What, all the things that I think of that I thought about in oil and gas, the value chain, how you get it to market, what is the value of it, what is the exploration cost? All of these ideas is needed to be thought through, and it seemed like everyone was focusing on just finding it, which is very important. But I started to have conversations with other people about what it would take for it to take off. A lot of people were highly skeptical. I think some still are. And I started to realize that it was going to need a strategic approach, and that there might be some room even early in the industry for people with a background in business development strategy, and just understanding financially how all this fits together. Most of the companies, other than maybe Coloma, are going to need funding, and a lot of it, to get off the ground, and it's going to come in stages. And what I realized was that there needed to be a bridge between the investors and the explorers. And over the last few months, I've been looking at how to do that, and I had the opportunity to start up Mafic in the last month with support from other geologists, independent consultants that I'm working with. There's a lot of excitement behind it. It's still early stages, but Mafic is kind of looking at opportunities to assist explorers in resources, knowledge, intel, strategy, as well as assisting investors with education to kind of understand what this is, how to get into it, what the risks are, how to manage those risks. And really, Mafic is positioning itself as kind of a partner in the middle to bring the investment that's needed to the right explorers, and doing our best to bring resources around those explorers. A lot of small startups can't afford some of the resources or to have all the resources and technology in-house. It's going to require partnerships, and there's a lot of strategic concepts that Mafic's kind of putting together to help these explorers maximize their capital and to help investors make smart decisions.
By the way, I was going to ask you about your company. You already gave us a brief summary, but tell us more. Tell us more about Mafic and what is the mission, the vision of the company, and what Mafic brings to the table in the geologic hydrogen space.
Yeah. So, very simply put, Mafic's vision is to be the bridge between investment and exploration. Some people don't necessarily think that that's needed, but from what we have observed in the market, the early, well-educated investors on the topic have already come into the space. I've talked to a lot of investors who are sitting on the fence that are kind of waiting for a big commercial discovery that haven't. And they can't wrap their head around things like the risk. There's so much science involved that they don't understand. How does that fit into success factors? And there's not been anyone who is well versed in the geology, the science, looking at the long-term picture too. For investors to come into this, they really need to be able to understand, at least on paper, from your initial desktop exploration concepts all the way through who the end user is and what that looks like in dollars per kilogram, in exploration costs, in the full supply chain that's going to take. The feasibility of it is something that they have questions on. And we have a lot of companies that have amazing geology teams and some pretty impressive technology and concepts that they're throwing into their exploration, but they're not going to necessarily be able to convey the midstream downstream. Or we can say that the lifting cost is between 50 cents to $1 per kilogram, which is pretty impressive and potentially a major disruption within the hydrogen markets. But then you start to get into questions of scalability of the field and transportation, and that's not their specialty. A lot of the people who work in that field too aren't really focused on this. So we realized that there was going to need to be somebody to strategically bridge the value chain and strategically bridge the investors with the explorers, and that was going to take a lot of thought. It takes strategy, it takes partnerships, it takes people from very diverse backgrounds all working together to think through this. And that's kind of where Mafic is setting itself up. We are going to, and it's early days too, you wear a lot of hats. Later on we may specialize in one area of this, but right now natural hydrogen needs help on all fronts. And we have a number of independent consultants, and that's kind of how we've set ourselves up, where not everyone can afford to do this full time, but a lot of people do have very unique specialties within geosciences or on the business value chain side. And what Maffic's been doing is gathering people from those backgrounds over the last 2 months and trying to put together a holistic team that we can solve any problem that is brought to us either from the investors or the explorers. There's no one else operating in this space this holistically and thinking 3, 5, 10 years out. We're not just focusing on what happens in the next 6 months. We are looking at what sort of conversations and plans need to be put together right now for 2, 3 years out. And that's how investment works. They're not looking at return on investment in 6 months. This is a long hold for most investors. And it really requires putting the kind of thought into it that far out.
Yes. Now, you have a team of consultants, I imagine. Do you also partner with other companies for this purpose?
Yes. So it's my intent to also partner with service providers, technology providers. We're kind of started some of those conversations around identifying what are some of the potential technologies. It's, you know, some of the explorers have already engaged. It's not like they're not very capable on their side of having some of these conversations, but it's always a help if we can help facilitate that. And we're looking at all the different pieces throughout the entire value chain. I mean, I talked to somebody who was doing research on a new concept for helium hydrogen separation for the surface. You know, looking at what technologies are coming out for trucking of hydrogen, because initially you're not going to have pipelines. Looking at what service providers are working on the latest tanks for hauling hydrogen via trains. What does that look like? What small scale, and scalability is a big part of this, is, you know, we're not going to have pipelines for probably 10 years in the US. We don't have the infrastructure, and I don't think there's the investment that's going to be put into the infrastructure for hydrogen in the US like this in Europe. So there's all these considerations and conversations, and, you know, helping put the value chain together, I think is important, and those conversations need to be happening now. So there's opportunities for the investors too in the value chain itself, not just in the exploration, but no one's gonna know what that is until we start having those conversations and really starting to look at the entire system on paper. And every country that is being explored is going to look different. How they're going to do things in Australia is going to look different from how they do things in Europe. Every region has its strengths and weaknesses. And that's kind of where we can be of help, is assessing that.
Perfect. Aaron, where in your opinion is the potential of geologic hydrogen? How and in which sectors or industries geologic hydrogen poses to have a big impact on?
That's a good question. So the sectors quantifying how much there is very difficult. I think that's a question everyone's trying to answer right now. With Jeffrey Ellis's model from the USGS estimating it at 5 trillion ton potential, obviously that got a lot of attention. I've heard some other estimates that are much, much, much higher than that. But I think you have to be conservative. And, you know, even that estimate, you know, he made a point of saying that not all that's recoverable. But I also look at the early days of oil, you know, or any resource really. There's an initial discovery that, hey, there's a lot more of this than we thought. The same was the case with helium. And as there was more exploration and more technology available to quantify it, the numbers kept on going up and up and up and up and up. And I don't think that's going to be any different for hydrogen. So I like to stay with the base case of what's been put out there publicly, which is still significant. Hydrogen for hundreds of years. You know, I don't think in the long run we're going to be talking about hydrogen in 200 years. I think at that point, hopefully with technology development, we'll be talking about nuclear fusion, and a lot of the transition fuels that are needed today won't be needed in 200 years. But that's a timeline that none of us are going to be around for. So really, it's worth focusing on how do we, if it's there, how do we commercialize it? How do we scale it? The scaling question is one of the fundamental questions to people wanting to jump into this. And I would say some of what I know, and call it gathered data points. Other people might call it intel. Some people might call it gossip. But it's taking as many data points from as many conversations with people as I can, and starting to kind of slowly draw that circle of what that could look like. And my initial thoughts is that it is commercially viable. It is, the resource is there. It is at a scale that is significant. Now, what we do with it and how we extract it, that's a whole nother conversation. But for where I think the potential is, I think there is scale to it. The challenge is going to be in getting it scalable.
But in which sectors do you think there will be more impact?
In which sectors? So I tend to, this is I think it's going to depend on what country you're in. I don't think the U.S. is going to be using hydrogen for the same applications as they will in the Asian market. Australia, I think, is going to look more at ammonia. They've got a lot of the capabilities, infrastructure. They're talking about some of the shipping as well, and there's a huge market for ammonia in Asia from Japan, South Korea, and some of the other countries there. I think that is, low carbon ammonia has a very high dollar amount on it per kilogram. So given how Australia is situated and the distances, transportation is a very challenging element of exploring in Australia. So I tend to think that ammonia is more likely, and how it's utilized from there, I couldn't tell you. But I think ammonia is going to be initially one of the end users or manufacturers. And in the US, I tend to think that it's going to be energy generation. And a lot of people are, bear with me, a lot of the explorers in the MCR are probably going to initially, cut contracts and sell it to petrochemical or fertilizer, because within that area, geographical area, there's a lot of geochemical processors or clients there that they could, truck it 50 miles and sell it to. So making money, selling it in the MCR, the mid-continental rift, I think is a fairly early days simple proposition. But then you start to look at scale. Let's say it is very scalable and there is a significant reservoir of hydrogen there. Well, what do you do then? My tendency, I'll share this is probably the first time I've publicly said this, so I think the opportunity for natural hydrogen in the Midwest is co-locating it with wind power. The band that is the most cost-effective for wind power runs from North Dakota down to Texas, and it runs through Kansas and Nebraska. Iowa is also high potential for wind. So you start to look at some of the challenges with the grid in the US, and one of the main challenges is backup. We have nuclear plants, we have a lot of natural gas that's being processed to generate electricity, and we're reliant on that for sustaining energy production. And it's one of the challenges with integrating solar and wind in is how do you manage the dips?
That's a base load.
Well, yep. And I mean, battery backup has been proposed, but cost of battery backup's anywhere from $65 to $125. So it's like, how do you really factor that? I mean, people in the US are only going to pay so much for electricity. So you can sell it for a green premium, because it's the lowest CO2 emitting hydrogen production process out there. So if you were to then utilize it for electrical generation, you can store it. There's limits to how long you can store it, but we're talking co-locating electrical generation with the actual assets, and the cost of putting in a hydrogen electrical generator is not that high. And if you're using it for backup or for smoothing your energy demand or energy supply, it's very viable for that. So and here's the other part of it too, which is the forecasts for energy demand in the US over the next 5 years, with data centers and AI continuing to gobble up more and more of it. You saw the partnership of Google with Fervo over in Nevada for geothermal. Geothermal has a lot of potential for that as well. Within the Midwest, though, you're going to have less options for that. And there's a significant opportunity for affordable land, and not everyone wants a data center on their farm. It's understandable. But there's a lot of land, and it's not expensive land necessarily in comparison to, say, places like California. So the US, I tend to think it's going to be more initially electrical generation. I don't think there's as big of a focus on decarbonizing industry like steel and cement like there is in the EU or other parts of the world. I think the US is going to be lagging in its decarbonizing efforts, and all indicators kind of are showing that currently. So how the US positions itself is the best market for natural hydrogen is selling to end users who care about the carbon content of their energy. And right now, that is certain end users that are pulling off the dirty grid. And one of those end users is data centers.
Mm-hmm. But earlier when you were answering this question, you made it clear. It will depend also in the where the resource is located, right? The context of that region, what they require, what is where it will be better allocated. So I guess your answer is mostly around the U.S., which is the country where you live, right, and where Mafic operates. But it will. And you consider that Europe, because it's obviously a different continent, the scenario will be different. Could you please tell us what you think, what your expectations are, how geologic hydrogen will play a role in the European geopolitical economic context?
So I think Europe's a challenging one to kind of figure out how it's going to be utilized. Looking at one concept that I've been thinking about and having discussions about with people is the infrastructure is a big determinant in the end use. The cost of transportation is a major factor for hydrogen. Also the issues with the more you transport it, the more you store it, the more potential for hydrogen to leak out, and then it becomes a climate change factor, and the reasons for utilizing it become less and less appealing to people. I think the European market is probably more suspicious of this, and there are good reasons for that. So I tend to think that Europe is going to probably look at it from the standpoint of what they know right now, which is green hydrogen. A lot of the infrastructure that's going in, pipeline conversions, pipeline building, storage facilities, ammonia, all of the infrastructure for green hydrogen, natural hydrogen is going to kind of fit into that. So I tend to think that if you look to see where green hydrogen end users are, is kind of where by the time it's scaled in Europe, it's going to be late to the game. So I expect it to follow the existing supply chain or value chain for green hydrogen. So you're talking cement production, usage in green steel production. Mm-hmm. Some of the original concepts or thought as to using it to decarbonize the most difficult sectors, I think is where you'll see it in Europe, and it's going to follow the existing supply chain that's been trailblazed by green hydrogen. Mm-hmm.
Now, going back to your continent, to your country, to the US, is Mafic associated with any of these new players in exploration in the mid-continental US?
Currently, we are partnered in, I'd say partners, we are currently advising is more of what we're doing with the explorers. There's one stealth company that we're talking to. There's another company that's in stealth startup mode that we're talking to that I can't mention. Mm-hmm. I've been working with a company called Pure Wave Hydrogen on strategy, mm-hmm. Technology application. They're currently going into, they have leases in Kansas. They're also widely looking. My goal is to partner with companies that are going to put the right strategies in place that can be successful, mm-hmm. And to try to help them help them with the investors and help them with kind of the filling in the middle. Right now, most teams are composed of specialty, call it leadership guidance, people with backgrounds in raising capital, and a geology team. But there's a lot of thought that needs to, and call it resources that need to be brought to the table in the middle as well. So we are looking at the entire field of what's going on and who's exploring where and what leases are, where there's opportunities, and trying to help the startups position themselves strategically. Currently, Mafic is supporting a company called Pure Wave Hydrogen. They're based out of Denver. We kind of fill in more as an advisory capacity at this point. There's a lot of challenges in the early stages to putting all the elements together looking 3 to 5 years out. So where we're trying to assist companies is looking at understanding the commercial aspects of where you're exploring. A lot of focus is on partnerships. So facilitating partnerships with other explorers, with technology providers, with universities that we're aware of that are quietly conducting research as well. There's more out there than people are aware of. It's not just Colorado School of Mines or the University of Colorado or MIT or Stanford or Texas A&M.
Wow.
There's a lot more interest and broader research going on out there. So understanding the full picture of where all the pieces are on the board in helping explorers maybe not make decisions right away, but understand some of the decisions that they're going to have to prepare for, and helping them at the beginning set themselves up as best as they can over the long term. Most of them don't have time to do the type of research that we're doing right now, or to be thinking 5 years out. But I look at it as it's a race, but it's about survival, because you got to look at these companies like they're tech startups. Survival in the VC world is, it's not given. There's a very small percentage of companies that make it to IPO, and looking at all the factors for why they're successful and what it takes, and then looking historically too to, when a bunch of companies go into a new basin in, oil and gas, or go into a new field in mining, what are the factors for who comes out successful? We've got 2 different case studies we're looking at, one for the shale oil gas boom, one for the recent decade of helium exploration. Helping advise companies on, how much capital they're going to really need, and strategies for ensuring that when the time comes, that capital is going to be available, because no one's being funded like Coloma. No one's going to have $350 million to sit on. The money's been spent, that kind of money. Maybe if there's more discovery down the road and more interest comes up, there'll be more access, but you can't take that as a given. You got to start with the worst case assumptions and kind of work back as, what's our A, B, and C plan? And there's certain concepts that we are putting together that I think are beneficial to both investors to be able to better vet who those companies are, but also for explorers as well, to how can they de-risk not just a specific project, but de-risk the exploration over the next 3 to 5 years. If you can make it past that 5-year hump to first discovery, commercial discovery, your chances of being in this in the long run and being able to exit are significantly higher. So with PureWave, I'm partnering with them. They've got a very strong geology team, and I'm, how do I put it, trying to partner with people who I think are thinking about all the right things. Partnerships with everywhere from technology providers to universities to other explorers, I think is going to be critical. And some of the smaller startups are, getting their feet underneath them and putting teams together. I think there's opportunities for us to assist with them as well. I will say most of our focus is on the investor side, but in this case, in these early days, you got to wear a lot of hats, and sometimes it's. I think there's value in helping out both sides.
Absolutely. Now, my next question. What are the main challenges and risks that exist in investing in geologic hydrogen?
That's a good question. and one we've been thinking about a lot. I think the biggest risk in investing in natural hydrogen to me is the Death Valley curve. And it's something I've talked about before. In Europe, you call it the Valley of Death curve. But it's this concept that, unless, like I said, not everyone's Coloma, as you progress in exploration, you need to raise more money for each phase of exploration. If you do not estimate the amount of money that's needed for that phase of exploration accurately, or you run into problems during that phase, running out of cash is the biggest risk. It's not that they don't, some of these teams don't have the potential to explore and make a commercial discovery, at least in that first, called the first phase of all this. It's that they're not going to be able to raise the funds that are needed or have the reserves that are needed to reposition themselves when they run into problems. And they will run into problems. There's so much that is unknown in the exploration process. Conceptually, this is something a number of people kick around. My numbers may be a little more conservative. I would say about 50 to 75% of the knowledge needed to explore this effectively and efficiently. How we gain that additional 25 to 50% of the knowledge is a risk. Mm-hmm. There are ways to mitigate that. There are a lot of ways to mitigate that. But if you're just going into this, optimistically that you're just going to go out there and use traditional oil and gas exploration concepts, find it, drill your exploration well, and what do you know? Our exploration well is also our production well. And then your pressures are going to be just perfect for it to flow to the surface, commercial grade with no separation. It's like, there's these things that need to be thought out. So to me, the risk is not thinking everything through and not having the reserves that are needed to solve problems. None of these enterprises or exploration companies are going to have a flawless exploration. Everyone's a first mover. Everyone's figuring it out as they go. You are developing the technology and the science as you're exploring. So how you explore is a determinant in your success and in your abilities to avoid the bottom of that death valley. So the biggest risk is the death valley curve, but there's a lot of factors as to why that's the case. It's running out of cash. For everyone but Coloma, it's running out of cash.
Now, why strategy matters in exploration, and what are the main factors that affect decision making regarding geologic hydrogen?
Yeah, and so strategy is not something most people think about when they think about exploration. It's probably not something they think about when they think about startups. But really, our concept for this, and I put out a little piece last night, is more based on this concept of emergent strategy, which is not, corporate strategic planning where you're, looking out 5 years and you got it all mapped out and putting a budget together and a plan together, and you go fearlessly into the beyond with this master plan for how to succeed in business. This isn't going to look like that, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about making decisions with information that is constantly evolving. In this case, the science is evolving, the research, every couple weeks, there's new research being published. Mm-hmm. Every conference that happens, there's a new potential direction for hydrogen. Where natural hydrogen, how it's explored for and how it's produced in 5 years, I think it's going to look dramatically different than what we think it will. In that kind of a environment, how you orient yourself is strategy. How you structure your culture, your communication, your investments, some of your call it positioning. Positioning, I think, is one of the biggest key differentiators for exploration companies. If you're a company, let's say you're a company that is going into, I couldn't even give you the term for it because I don't think anyone has really landed on it, because in oil and gas we call it basin. I've heard the word kicked around, so we call it terrain because that's the most scientifically accurate one, but whatever you want to call it, let's just call it a region for now. You go into one region and buy your leases, or you do your initial exploration, you secure your leases or your licenses, and you start doing all your surveying, and something comes up. You don't know what it's going to be. It could be, there's an element of the geology. There's issues with the aquifers. We don't know what we don't know. But if your strategy was, hey, we're going to secure capital, we're going to do this, on the cheap, raise 3-5 million, and we're going to go into one area and explore that, that's a lot of risk if something goes wrong. And you hope that you can figure it out, and you hope that you can reorient if you need to. But what if you can't access the capital at that time? What if you don't have reserves to go into a new region? Positioning matters. If you were to, say, be a little more conservative, you might not lock yourself into that one area. You might have spent the extra money to survey or do some farther looking desktop research and have another target and have funds set aside that if you had to reorient yourself and you run into problems and they're not, cost effectively surmountable, you're gonna move. And not knowing what we don't know, how you set the team that you build, the funding that you bring in, the partnerships that you create, all of it can be done very strategically to allow you to pivot quickly. And quick pivots in tech startups is the name of the game. And I don't think it's going to be any different in natural hydrogen exploration. So positioning is directly tied into strategy. And not everyone has the time or wants to think about all this. It's my goal to educate as much as we can, both the investors and the explorers, on concepts of trying to give everyone the best chance of making it through the 3 to 5 year exploration time frame. I'd like to see all the explorers do it. There's a lot of great teams out there with a lot of amazing potential, but I don't see, without looking 3 to 5 years out, without looking at all the elements and factors that are going to play into this, and having a very well thought out approach, and setting yourself up to be able to have decisions to make when you run into problems. That's really what emergent strategy is. Mm-hmm. So there's one of my favorite authors. See if I can get his name right. He's actually at a Columbia. I'll give it to you later, but it's Alejandro Salazar.
Alejandro Salazar.
Yes, he worked with Porter too, so he's not unknown within strategy circles. He's just got a very unique perspective, I think, to the concept of strategy.
Okay.
And I think as we were researching this early days, there was a realization that there was an amazing amount of applicability to utilizing some of those concepts.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Question: your company, do you give a global reach to your service? And is like you just mentioned, South America, a guy from Colombia, or you are focused in the U.S.?
We do have. Let's put it this way. Our focus right now is on North America, just given what's going on. However, we're not against working internationally. I have conversations with people in Australia, Europe, South America. It's more of, if there's a need, we're more than willing to work. It's just, there's a limit given the size of Mafic and recently starting up. Yeah. As to how much time we can commit to researching or building a library of research on various regions. But a lot of the concepts that I'm talking about apply everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Great. So I'm going to leave some links for the audience to contact you, Aaron, if they are interested in investing in Geologic Hydrogen, or for developers and explorers to be able to contact you. So now, Aaron, some final insights to this conversation?
Final insights. So that's a tough one because it's like everyone else, I'm kind of guessing as to where things are going to go. I think one of the insights that I would put out there is I really think the true investment cycle is going to kick off after the first major commercial discovery announcement. And I think that's going to happen within the next 12 months. Conservatively, I think it could happen as early as 6 months, given the amount of exploration that's going on, and the stage of exploration that's going on. I'd be surprised if there's not an announcement within the next 6 to 12 months. So to me, in the early days, it's about if you can balance your investment in a risk that you're comfortable with. Right now, it's more about positioning. Nothing's going to happen pretty significantly over the summer is my gut feeling, we'll call it that. But short term, it's about positioning with all the explorers that are coming out. I expect too that the number of explorers announcing themselves is going to continue at the rate that it is. I'll be surprised if there's not 60 companies worldwide saying they're exploring for natural hydrogen within the next 6 months. So there's my one insight on exploration. I think the second insight is that after that commercial discovery, you're going to start to see more conversations around the midstream, downstream kicking up, and which is going to be necessary. There's going to be opportunities for people in, call it, not with the returns that exploration has, but obviously not with the risk as well. I think you're going to see a lot more talk and conversation and partnering within the downstream, midstream side of things, everywhere from new proposals on pipeline technology for natural hydrogen within the US. I think Europe's a little further ahead, but a lot of the conversation is going to steer on how do we integrate this into the supply chain that we're already talking about for green hydrogen. I think that's something significant that's going to come to the front. The third thing that I think is going to come to the front is a broader acceptance from policy and regulation internationally for exploring for natural hydrogen. I think you're seeing a little bit of that already, but I think you're going to see more focused discussion on incentives and research. My last piece I'll leave you with is, what is this going to look like in 5 years? I think the model for natural hydrogen exploration is going to expand to look at stimulated hydrogen, that there's going to be a certain level of technical convergence between CCUS, stimulated hydrogen, and natural hydrogen exploration. There's too much crossover in technology and potential. So that's kind of all I have. I appreciate the time to come on here and talk with you, Jose, and really appreciate you putting this podcast together.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Yeah, I think very exciting times are coming for this new clean energy resource. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next few months and see the results of the first, the pioneering exploration effort. Again, thank you very much, Aaron, for this time very well spent in this conversation. And to the audience, thank you very much for watching. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Thank you.